السلام عليك زين الأنبياء السلام عليك.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, we praise Him and we send His peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad and upon all the prophets and messengers. Welcome everyone back to the beauty of Islam. And this is a class where we really try to highlight some of the bigger questions in life and that relate to our existence and the answers and the perspective that Islam gives regarding those, larger questions in life. So far in the previous sessions, we covered an overview of the religion of Islam, just kind of an intro to Islam at a very high level and really being concise. And then in the second session, we talked about Allah, God, and His attributes and what Muslims believe about the divine and what He has told us about Himself in Revelation. And in session 3, the last class, we focused on the good life and how we are meant to live in the life of this world. So in this session, God willing, we're going to talk about the afterlife. And we're going to talk about this concept of the hereafter and the meaning that our life has in this world and how it has repercussions and consequences with God in the hereafter. So we focused on how we should live in session 3. And in this session, we're going to talk about the Islamic concept of the afterlife. And we're going to look at the resurrection, the concept of resurrection and coming back to life after we die and pass from this world. We're going to talk about the judgment, and we'll talk about the manifestations of our decisions and our belief and how that's going to be represented in the hereafter when we meet God and when we stand for judgment. And then finally, we'll talk about paradise and hell and the understanding of this eternal life in either one of these two abodes. So, Bismillah, in the name of God, we begin. So, God says in the Quran, قُلْ إِنَّ الْمَوْتَ الَّذِي تَفِرُّونَ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّهُ مُلَاقِيكُمْ ثُمَّ تُرَدُّونَ إِلَى عَالِمِ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. God tells us in many places in the Quran, He informs us of the resurrection. And He tells us that death is a certainty and we cannot escape it, but there will come another life after death. So the translation of that verse is, say, O Prophet, to the people, the death you are running away from will inevitably come to you. Then you will be returned to the knower of the seen and unseen, God, and He will inform you of what you used to do. So this verse here informs us of a judgment that is coming, and that we will return to our Creator, the knower of the seen and unseen, and that we will be judged for the way that we lived in this world. So in the previous sessions, we talked about this covenant that we took with God when He brought forth all of the souls of humanity, all of the descendants of Adam, and He made them all bear witness, am I not your Lord? And everyone said, indeed you are. We bear witness to that. And that God gave us the intellect through which we can recognize truth from falsehood. And to help us, in addition to that, He sent the prophets and messengers in different times and to different peoples throughout time. And we Muslims believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, is the final prophet and messenger who's sent to all people. So all of this is to prepare us for that meeting that we will have when we return to God. So when God tells us that this death that you are running away from, you think that the life of this world is everything, because that's what the nafs, this lower self inclines towards. We talked about the idea of the false life and the true life in session number 3. And that God says, respond to God and his messenger when he calls you to that which gives you life. And that the life of this world is not the full reality of what it means to be alive. And that true life is found in your connection to God. And then that leads you and gives you a good life in this world, even if it's a difficult life. A good life doesn't necessarily mean luxury, but it means a life of obedience, a life where God comes and you see his assistance and support in your life and so forth. Then when you return to him, you experience reward and bliss and blessings from him that are beyond description. So here, God tells us the death that you're running away from, it will inevitably come to you. Then, but is that the end? No, it's not the end. Then you will be returned to the knower of the seen and unseen, and he will inform you of what you used to do. And this is the transition to the true life. The life that has no end, that abode in the hereafter, we Muslims believe, and we'll talk about paradise and hell. It has no end. It is everlasting. One of the great scholars of Islam, whose name is Imam Al-Ghazali, when he was about to pass, it was a very interesting story, but when he was about to pass away, after he passed away, they found a poem that was written under his pillow. And it's a really beautiful poem that really, it highlights the Muslim understanding of our transition to the hereafter and the nature of this life and the nature of the life to come, and how for people who believe in God and live in a way that is righteous, it is a treasure. That naturally people fear death because it's unknown. But righteous people, they yearn for that meeting with God. And they've prepared their lives fulfilling the commandments that he has brought down in Revelation, living a good life of virtue and righteousness. So Imam Al-Ghazali writes, he says, "Say to my brothers when they see me dead, and weep for me, lamenting me in sadness, think you I am this corpse you are to bury?" In other words, do you think that this dead body that you're going to bury, that's me? I swear to God, this dead one is not I. I am the spirit, and this is my body. It was my dwelling, my garment for a time. I am a treasure, hidden I was beneath this talisman of dust, wherein I suffered that there is difficulty in the life of this world. I am a pearl, and a shell imprison me. But leaving it, all trials I have left behind. I am a bird, and this once was my cage. But I have flown and left it as a token. I praise God who has set me free and made for me a dwelling in the heavenly heights. Before now I was a dead man in your midst, but I have come to life and shed my shroud. Beautiful. And that's the reality of everything, is that this body, we believe that our soul has been placed within this body. And when we're resurrected, the body will also be brought back together and restored. But then when we enter paradise, God will actually give us a different constitution so that we can actually experience the level of spiritual and other types of bliss in paradise, that we will have a totally new constitution, right? And for example, I'm getting ahead of myself, but talking about paradise, that people in paradise, when they eat food, the food is not disposed of the way that it's disposed of in our earthly body. Yes, that actually it becomes sweat, and it's released from our body in a form of sweat that is sweeter than the sweetest perfume. So it's a different type of constitution. It's a different type of life. But that is what the believer works for. So we transition to the true life. We leave the limitations of the life of this world behind. And we believe as Muslims that the life of this world is the world that contains it has the most density as it relates to spiritual realities. And that the life of the grave that comes after it, and then the resurrection, and then the abode of the hereafter has increasingly higher degrees of spiritual freedom and lacking that density. So there are so many higher realities as we're going to come to shortly, God willing. So then this brings us to the resurrection. This is an important part of Muslim belief and our understanding of the afterlife. So we believe in a resurrection. We believe that there will come a time in this world where everyone will pass and that the life of this world will come to an end. Just as everything lives and dies, there is an ultimate time that this world itself, this existence that we're experiencing now, will also come to an end. And that everyone will pass away, and then there will come a time when God will resurrect everyone once again. And we also believe in that in-between time that we will experience a type of life in the grave. That there is a life in the grave that is a preview and a preparation for ultimately whatever is going to come. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he said that the grave is either a garden from the gardens of paradise or a pit from the pits of the hellfire. May God protect us. But that it gives us insights into what is to come. And for the believer, when they enter the grave, for everyone when they enter the grave, but the believer is the one who has the answers to this question, that when a person is laid to rest in the grave, there are two angels that come and question them. And they ask them, who is your Lord? And this isn't something that you answer from your information. This is something that you have to answer through your state of being. So a believer would say, my Lord is Allah. My Lord is God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one without partner, the one who sent all of the prophets and messengers, who created me and created all things. Then they will say, what is your religion? And for people who follow the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, they say, my religion is Islam. Or for previous peoples who followed their prophets, they would say, my religion is the religion of Prophet, the one that they followed. Then they will say, and who is your prophet? And then for us, we will say, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him. And there's another beautiful narration. I really love this narration, where they say, what do you say about this man? And scholars comment on that and say that people will see the image of the Prophet Muhammad, or that they will see the Prophet Muhammad. And the believer will recognize, that's the Prophet Muhammad. He is my prophet and messenger. He was sent at the end of time to all people to teach them about God and invite them to believe in God and so forth. Then when a person answers those questions, the grave will become very expansive and comfortable. And that it is a type of life. There's still a connection to one's children and family, but then there's also a connection to the people in that realm. But that is a little bit beyond the scope of today's lesson. But it's important for us to know that we believe in the life of the grave. We believe in the unseen. And people who only really judge things by material standards, they might say, how can you believe that a dead person is actually experiencing some sort of life? They've lost life. Yes, they no longer have a life in this material world, in this dunya, in this worldly life, but they moved on to something else. And God has given us signs of that in this life. You might have, a family member fall asleep right next to you, and they might have a dream that they're flying in the sky or eating something delicious, or they might even be having a nightmare, experiencing something terrifying. and you just see them peacefully with their eyes closed. And then they wake up, they go, oh my God, I'm so happy that I wasn't there. What happened? I just saw this and that. And actually, they say that the emotional experience that people have in dreams impacts them even after they wake up. Which is why someone might need a while to actually brush off, a negative dream, a nightmare. But you would say, oh, that person's sleeping to you. They're not experiencing things. Their eyes are closed, but they're seeing things, aren't they, in their dreams? But their eyes are closed. Well, they still see things. They taste things. They smell things. They feel things, right? So just like the sleeping person is dreaming of something that the awakened person can't see, the dead person experiences things that the living can't see, right? And then we believe that after that time period, there will come an appointed time that God will bring people back to life for a judgment before Him. And there are signs in the life of this world as well about that judgment. So God says in the Quran, قُلْ يُحْيِيهَا الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٍ, that people will often challenge the prophets and messengers. And in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he actually was dealing with people who didn't believe in an afterlife at all. Like the polytheists of Mecca, that was a quote-unquote foreign concept to them. So it's not like other Abrahamic faiths where we believe in similar concepts. They said, you're telling me that these decayed bones are going to come back to life? That person who's dead 100 years later, 1,000 years later, they're going to come back to life? That sounds preposterous. And they would challenge the prophets and messengers. So God says that about a particular man who was challenging the prophet, he says, who can give life back to bones after they've decayed? Say to him, he who created them in the first place will give them life again. He has full knowledge of every act of creation. So, the one who brought us out of absolute non-existence, like even if you want to think about it in a material sense, your atoms and molecules at some point never existed. He brought them from non-existence into existence, and then they might get decayed in the earth, but they're still there somewhere. And he just reforms them and restores them, and the person comes back to life. So the one who asks, who can give life back to bones after they've decayed, say to him, قُلْ يُحْيِيهَا الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. The one who brought it out of non-existence in the first place, he can bring it back again. And he has full knowledge of every act of creation. And God tells us in the Quran, look at the earth. Now for us in North America, it's winter. And all of the leaves have fallen off the trees. And if you look outside, it looks dead. You can't grow flowers. You can't grow strawberries. Those things don't grow in the winter. And you might even have a particular tree where all the leaves fall out. It looks dead. And then when spring happens, it comes back to life. You see the little buds sprouting and you see it growing again. Even in the seasons that we have, there are signs that God is giving us. They say that even in the seasons, if you look at spring, that's like when a person is young, when they're a baby, and everything just is growing, constantly growing. And then when they get to their youth, it's like summer. They're full of fire and energy, and there's so much there. And then when they start growing into adulthood and they get into the fall, just like the leaves change color, your hair starts to change color. You start to feel all that. And then winter, everything's not really working. You feel it in your bones and so forth. And that just as that cycle takes place, He continuously has that cycle, come and go time and time and time again. So everything on the earth has died, and He brings it back to life. So He can't bring us back to life? Of course He can. So it's important for us to understand that, and that the bigger miracle is being brought out of non-existence in the first place into the life of this world. So after we're resurrected, then we stand before God for judgment, that we're all gathered before God for the judgment. And one of the things that takes place on that day is, and I'm reading and borrowing a lot from A Thinking Person's Guide to Islam. So he says here, talking about heaven and hell and the afterlife, he says that on that day, things will become manifest. All of the things that we were doing, good or bad, they take on a reality in the hereafter, and they affect us directly. So he says something really interesting here. He says, so in fact, all that we do in the life of this world, or the things that we do to other people, whether it's kindness or harming them, we are actually doing to ourselves. We are actually doing to ourselves. One of the things that we believe as Muslims is that God doesn't benefit from our obedience, and He's not harmed by our disbelief. But we are the ones who benefit from obedience, and we are the ones that are harmed by sins and turning away from God. So in the hereafter, the life of this world is like a farmland where we plant all the seeds of good actions, of belief in God and prayer and worship and virtue and beautiful character and all the things that we talked about in the third session. And then the hereafter, we see the fruits of those efforts, they manifest. And the same is true for sins and disobedience. So when we stand before God, there is a scale, and the scale of the hereafter, here on the picture in the slide, it's a scale of, that you weigh things, gold or food or something of that nature. But in the hereafter, it's weighing realities. Now, our actions are placed there. But even the smallest thing, God says in the Quran that a person, even if they did the smallest amount of good, they'll see it. And if they did the smallest amount of evil, they'll see it. And that part of the mission and duty of the prophets and messengers is to help us prepare for that meeting with God and judgment before Him. To inform us there will come a day. The way that you live in this world will have serious consequences. God created you for a great wisdom and purpose. Don't take it for granted. Don't underestimate it. Don't throw that opportunity away and dishonor the gift that the all-powerful, the almighty, the all-wise has given you, because there will be repercussions. So God tells us in the Quran that there will be a man on that day, and this is representative of anyone, who when they stand before the judgment, they will say, "Ha'umu qra'u kitabiyah." Here's the book of my deeds. Here, take it and read it. Whether it's an angel or whoever it may be, take it and read it. Inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiyah. I knew that I was going to meet this judgment, that I was going to come to this time of being judgment. And then the other person will say, I wish I wasn't judged, and I wish I never existed in the first place. Well, just like we didn't have a choice in our own existence, we don't have a choice on whether we're going to continue that existence or not. All of that is set by God. So we have to make the most of it. And we have to respect that He is the one who's all-powerful. God tells us in the Quran, "La yas'al amma yaf'al wa hum yus'alun." He's not questioned about what He does, but they will be questioned. He's the one in authority, supreme authority. Glorious is His majesty. So whoever does an atom's weight of good shall see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil shall see it. So everything we do in the life of this world, we should see it as planting a seed, and that it will have manifestations in the hereafter. And then the author of A Thinking Person's Guide to Islam, he says, what is in the next life? However, in the next life, what is inside of us becomes external. So when we are going to stand for judgment before God, all of the things that we've done become manifested and are visible. They become realities that people see. So it shows us that one, we can't escape, and two, we have to take advantage of the life that we have, because everything we do has a spiritual manifestation in the hereafter. So what does that mean? So for example, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he said, arrogant people on the day of resurrection, on the day of judgment, arrogant people will be as small as an ant, and people will trample over them. Someone might say, like, that just sounds like fantasy, but it's a spiritual reality, is that person's value and measure with God, because pride only belongs to God. He is the only one who legitimately can be proud. So if anyone is arrogant, they are rivaling the Lord of the worlds, and they're not going to win. So their true measure, their true value is manifest in insignificance, total insignificance on the day of resurrection. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he tells us about people who would eat from usurious transactions, riba, and that it was as if that they would be eating rocks and stones and filling up their stomachs until they could no longer walk, because that's a manifestation of the spiritual poison of those sins. He also tells us about the spiritual manifestations and the realities of beautiful things. There's a beautiful hadith, a prophetic narration, in which he says, I saw in a vision these realities of the hereafter, that what is inside of people, when it becomes external, how it's going to look. He said, I saw a man from my faith community who was going to be taken by angels of punishment, that they had surrounded him. So then his washing up before prayer, his wudu, when a Muslim gets ready to pray, there's a particular way of washing, that act of obedience came and saved him from those angels. I saw another man who was surrounded by devils, and his remembrance of God, calling upon God's most beautiful names, reciting the Quran, various invocations that we have in our religion, forms of remembrance of God, came and protected him from those devils. I saw another man who was so thirsty and so parched that he didn't have anything to drink. Now, this is the hereafter. This is not a type of thirst that's a physical thirst. It's a spiritual thirst. It's something else, experiencing the realities of the hereafter. So his fasting during the month of Ramadan came to him and gave him to drink. So you withheld yourself and from food and drink out of devotion to God. On that day when people will experience the most extreme form of being parched and thirsty, your fasting will come and give you water to drink. He said, I saw another man who was surrounded by all of this darkness before him and behind him, to his right and to his left. And he then performed the pilgrimage. He performed the Hajj pilgrimage, and it saved him from all of those forms of darkness that were surrounding him. I saw a man who the angel of death was taking his soul, and he was about to die. In other words, there's a blessing that God puts in the lifespan of people who do this particular act of goodness. Then his kindness to his two parents came to him and told the angel of death to leave him to live longer, that there's more blessing in a person's life when they're good to their parents. So there are many other manifestations of that. There's another hadith, a prophetic narration, where the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he says that there will be people who will be standing on pulpits made of light, made of pure light, and that they will have these beautiful faces that shine radiantly. Even the prophets and messengers will say, who are these people? And then they will be told, these are the people who loved one another for God's sake. They're from different tribes and different races and different backgrounds and different colors, but they came together and they loved one another for God's sake. They will be standing on pulpits made of light. And there are other people who will be given crowns made of pure light, and people who will stand on pulpits made of pearl and different kinds of things. And these are all realities of the hereafter. So this is an indication that all the things that we do in the life of this world will have manifestations in the hereafter. That there will be realities that will form in the hereafter from acts of obedience, from charity, from patience, from beautiful character, from prayer and fasting, and so forth. And this just indicates that what we do really impacts us. And just like in the life of this world, what we eat affects our body, what we do, the actions that we engage in, for good or bad, they impact our soul. And that impact is much longer. There will come a time when we will leave this body behind, but we will never leave our soul behind. As one of the great scholars of Islam, Imam Ash-Shafi'i, he said, you are by your soul, not your body, a human. It is your soul that makes you human. Animals eat, drink, and sleep and procreate. That's part of the earthly realm. But God gave you a soul that is distinct and honored. So, really what we are doing to ourselves. So then this brings us to one of the final points here, which is the reality after we're resurrected is that people will stand before God for judgment. And those who engaged in belief and worshiped God and lived a virtuous life, they will be entered into the gardens of paradise. And literally the word in the Quran for paradise is the garden, the place of life, the place of vibrancy, the place of purity, the abode of honor, to live therein everlastingly. And they will experience a life in which there is no sickness, there is no sadness, there is no enmity or jealousy or any of the things that exist in this world in the abode of paradise. And then there will be other people, and we ask God for protection, who will then be disbelievers and people who turned away from God and engaged in sin. They will be punished in the fire, and there is extensive description of both paradise and the fire in the Quran. But really, the Quran tells us these things so that we can prepare. So that we are really, sometimes the human being, any person, if they're really hurting themselves or they're engaging in a particular behavior that is not good for them, sometimes you really need to scare them straight. Sometimes it's just like, okay, for example, someone's engaging in a particular activity or behavior that at this point in their lives, just fun and games. But then you show them someone who, this is 20 years later, look at where they're at. They're homeless. They've lost all ability to control themselves. They have the worst tendencies within them have been brought out, and they've taken full control over this person such that they can't live a dignified life anymore. Is that what you want? Just for a little bit of fun? Or being around bad company and then, something happens and it really destroys a person's life. Sometimes you got to scare them straight to wake up. And God does that in the Quran when he talks about the fire. What is going to tell you how serious this is? Do you think that this life that I've given you, this opportunity that I've given you, do you think the greatest treasure which is coming to know me and worshiping me and fulfilling the purpose for which you were created, which is servitude, do you think that that's a small thing to be thrown away lightly? Well, so you take it seriously, and so you know what opportunity I've given you, there are eternal repercussions on both sides. So the human being benefits from that. And the author here of A Thinking Person's Guide to Islam, he says it beautifully. He says, this kind of fear is positive, not negative. So sometimes we think of fear as being purely negative, or pain as being purely negative. I remember, someone saying that pain often lets us know that something is wrong. But then there are other types of pain that are productive types of pain, like the pain of child labor. It's not like the pain that something is wrong, but it's a pain that is actually productive and good. And just like if a person is exercising, there's a pain that comes with that, but it's a productive type of pain. So when we're talking about when God instills fear within his creation, it's a positive fear. It's not a negative fear. It's not meant to debilitate you. It's not meant to make a person lose hope, but rather, none of us knows how long we have, so we have to take our lives seriously because we only have so much time in order to plant these seeds that will have very real manifestations in the hereafter. So this kind of fear is positive, not negative. It helps us to not be lazy and to constantly do our best to avoid it, i.e. the fire. It helps us to constantly do our best to avoid it. And I wanted to end with a verse of the Quran that really helps us understand that that true judgment and true justice takes place in the hereafter, and on that day, all of the scores will be settled. All the debts will be repaid. Even though we should try to have a sense of justice and law and balance in the world, the truest and fullest ultimate justice only comes from God. For example, if someone takes the life of another human being wrongfully, we try to have a sense of justice there, but you can never bring that person back. So even then, that justice is incomplete. It's not perfect justice. Only God can truly restore all of those things, and that will happen in the hereafter. So this judgment that we believe in and the ultimate end where God places certain people in paradise who believed and did righteous deeds through his mercy, and other people to be punished through his justice, God says, indeed, God does not wrong people in any way, but people wrong themselves. We believe that we have the free will to worship and obey or to do otherwise. But we will see the consequences of our actions. And the most significant of all consequences is the following, is what I said in the previous sessions, that the greatest opportunity, the greatest treasure to be discovered is God himself. God said, I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known. So this is the opportunity that we've been given. The greatest of all of the enjoyments and bliss of paradise is gazing upon God's noble countenance. That's the greatest of all the rewards and all of the bliss in paradise. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he said, it contains what no eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard of the most beautiful sounds, and has never crossed through the human imagination, has never occurred to the human heart before. So even the least of paradise's rewards and pleasures is beyond comprehension. So what then of looking and gazing upon God's noble countenance himself, which is something that is beyond description, and once again does not have any smallest amount of anthropomorphism or comparing God to his creation or anything of that nature. But what happens in paradise is that a person's spiritual insight is so powerful that it manifests even for them physically. So just like we can witness God with our hearts in this world, there will be an even more tangible, or an even more, for lack of a better word, from the perception of our sight, that there will be an even more sensory, an ability for that inner sight to take over our sight, such that we will witness the divine and see him. And the worst of all of the punishments of hellfire, may God protect us, is being totally distant and veiled from God. And God tells us in the Quran that there are people who disbelieved in him, that on the day of resurrection, God will not speak to them, nor will he look at them, nor will he purify them. And we seek refuge. We don't want that for anyone, but that's an indication that that in and of itself is the greatest punishment. But that occurs to the people who didn't seek him out anyway. Now, it's also important, and I'll end with this, I promise, is that people who never heard about the message, people who never had access to a prophet or messenger, those people are not held accountable. That on the day of resurrection, there will be another test that God presents to those people, and then they will be judged based on that. But for example, someone who lived in a time very far away from people who believed in God or had any access to a sound revelation, and in our time, even access to Islam and learning about the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and this religion, that those people will not be held accountable. So it's important just to clarify that point. So we will end here. May God's peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad and upon all of the prophets and messengers. And we ask God to bless these sessions and to bless all those who are present and all who are watching online, and to show us the truth as truth, and to grant us the ability to follow it, and to show us falsehood as falsehood, and to protect us from falling into it. By your mercy, O most merciful. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And all praise belongs to God, Lord of the worlds.
Thank you for watching one of Al-Maqasid's online educational offerings. Our mission at Al-Maqasid is to cultivate holistic learning environments rooted in knowledge, devotion, and service. For more information, please visit our website at almaqasid.org and connect with other online content at almaqasid.org/connect.